The Pacific did not care about her. That was the first thing Vivian Hartwell understood when she stepped out of the car and felt the cold hit her face. Not the polite chill of an air-conditioned boardroom, but the blunt, indifferent cold of open water in November. The sea didn't know she had lost 3 contracts in a single morning. It didn't know that Marcus, whom she had trusted with both her company and her heart for 6 years, had cleaned out his desk and his conscience simultaneously, leaving behind a note so brief it had seemed almost insulting. "I'm sorry. This isn't working. For either of us." 11 words to end something she had believed in with her whole chest. She stood at the edge of the parking lot, heels sinking slightly into the gravel. Still wearing the charcoal blazer she'd had on since 6 a.m. Her assistant, Priya, had called 4 times. Her board chair had left a voicemail she hadn't opened. Her phone sat in the cup holder of the rental car and would stay there. The beach at Crescent Cove was not a beautiful beach in the postcard sense. It was a working stretch of Northern California coast gray sand, dark kelp at the tide line, pelicans moving in low formation over brown water. In the summer, it drew families. In November, it was nearly empty. A man was raking something near the far end of a small boat rental dock. 2 joggers disappeared around a headland. Otherwise, nothing. The wind moved through everything. Vivienne walked. She was 36 years old. She had built Hartwell Consumer Analytics from a 2-person consulting firm into a company with 78 employees and 3 regional offices. She had been profiled in 3 national business publications. She had worn that profile like armor for years, until the day she realized the armor had grown into her skin, and she could no longer tell where the executive ended and the woman began. The company had been doing well, by any external measure, quarterly growth, a promising acquisition pipeline, a new platform product the engineering team had spent 18 months building, and then, in the space of 3 weeks, the lead investor had quietly pulled back from the Series C. A competing firm had preemptively patented a core component of their methodology. 2 of her biggest client contracts had lapsed, the clients choosing a competitor whose pitch deck had apparently been more compelling in a way she had failed to anticipate. She had managed each of these crises with the clinical competence she applied to everything. She had stayed late, run the numbers, run them again, briefed her board calmly, and with a recovery plan that was still, technically, viable. And then Marcus had left. 6 years he had worked alongside her as VP of Strategy. Somewhere in year 3, it had become something else, quiet and complicated. Not quite a relationship in the declared sense, but unmistakably something. A thing that lived in the space between professional and personal, and had never been forced to define itself. She had preferred it that way. Keeping things undefined meant keeping them manageable. She was good at managing things. Apparently, she had been less good than she thought. His note was 11 words. She'd counted had converted the enormous and unbearable into the measurable and specific, because that was the kind of thing she did. "I'm sorry, this isn't working. For either of us, 6 years of something unnamed, and she'd been given the word count of a grocery list. She had been 29 when her daughter was born. 30 when she lost her. That loss had been the original fracture. Everything that came after the company, the relentless calendar, the marriage to work that left no room for the messiness of actual people had been, she now understood, a long and elaborate way of not sitting still long enough to feel the shape of that absence. Marcus had known it. He'd told her once, quietly, over a dinner neither of them had cooked. "You work like someone who's running away from something." She'd laughed it off. She was good at laughing things off. The sand pulled at her heels. She stopped, removed her shoes, and carried them. The cold came through her stockings immediately. It felt honest. There was something clarifying about physical discomfort, when the discomfort you were actually fleeing was a different kind entirely. 7 years. Her daughter would have been 7 years old. In her mind, Clara was still too round-cheeked, the particular weight of her in the car seat. The smell of her hair after a bath. Vivienne had never permitted herself to imagine the 7-year-old version. It had seemed, for a long time, like a form of presumption, as if imagining the child continuing to grow was a way of deciding something she had no right to decide. Vivienne sat down on a piece of driftwood the sea had pushed up and left behind. She was not a woman who cried in public. She was not sure, in this moment, that she could honestly be called a woman who cried at all, not in the full, collapsed, heaving way that the situation perhaps warranted. What she felt instead was a kind of physical pressure behind her sternum, as if her body had been holding something compressed for a very long time, and the mechanism was finally starting to give. She sat with it. The gulls screamed overhead, unbothered. She didn't know how long she sat. Long enough for the light to shift slightly, the low November sun moving sideways through a gap in the clouds and laying a stripe of silver across the water. Long enough for the cold to move from her feet into her ankles. Long enough for the man with the rake at the far end of the dock to finish his work and disappear inside. Long enough to feel not better, exactly, but slightly more like a person and slightly less like a system in failure. She heard them before she saw them. A child's laugh, pure, unguarded. The kind of laugh that happened when a person was not yet old enough to modulate their joy for an audience. Then a lower voice, a man's voice, saying something she couldn't quite catch over the wind, followed by the child's laugh again, ratcheting higher. Vivienne looked up. The little girl was running along the edge of the surf, with both arms out like wings, her red jacket open and catching the wind. She was perhaps 5 or 6, it was hard to tell exactly at this distance, and she was running with the complete physical commitment of a child who has not yet learned to hold anything in reserve. Her dark blonde hair flew behind her. Her boots were leaving deep prints in the wet sand. The man behind her was tall and unhurried. He jogged easily, not trying to catch her, but simply keeping pace. Close enough to intervene if the surf reached her, but far enough back to let her feel free. He was wearing a gray flannel work shirt, rolled to the elbows despite the cold, canvas pants, work boots unlaced. He had the kind of build that came from actual labor rather than a gym-wide shoulders, a certain economy of movement. His hair was dark and needed cutting. They were maybe 30 yards from Vivienne when the little girl noticed her. Children make these calculations differently than adults. The girl stopped running mid-stride, pivoted, and stared, not rudely, but with the frank, interested assessment that a child uses when she encounters something her mind wants to categorize. The man caught up to her, and she said something to him, pointing. He looked up. Vivienne became aware of how she must appear. A woman in a business blazer, sitting on driftwood on a November beach, barefoot, stockings sandy, shoes in her lap. She didn't move. The man put his hand briefly on the girl's shoulder, not restraining her, just touching, and they walked over. "Daddy," the girl said, pulling slightly ahead. She was crying. She wasn't crying anymore. But she had been. The girl had seen something true. Vivienne opened her mouth to say something dismissive and adult, "I'm fine, just getting some air," and instead found herself silent. The man stopped a few feet away. He didn't say "sorry to bother you," or "are you all right?" which would have given her an easy script. He just looked at her with a straightforward, unhurried expression, the way a person looks at a landscape they are trying to understand. His eyes were a light, clear, gray. "Cold day to sit still," he said finally. Not an accusation, just an observation. "I know," Vivienne said. The little girl had already bridged the remaining distance, and was now standing directly in front of Vivienne, with her hands clasped behind her back, studying her face. "Your shoes have little bows," the girl said. Vivienne looked down at her heels. They did have small bows. She had never particularly noticed. "They do," she agreed. "I'm Rosie," said the girl. "That's my dad. His name is Connor." The man Connor looked mildly embarrassed in the way of a person who has given up trying to teach a 5-year-old to wait for introductions. "Connor Marsh," he said, and extended his hand. His handshake was firm and dry, and had none of the performative quality that business handshakes had trained Vivienne to expect. "Vivienne," she said. "Vivienne Hartwell. You don't have to leave," Rosie told her earnestly, as if Vivienne had been considering it. "We come here every Saturday. There's a crab house down there." She pointed vaguely down the beach. "Dad fixes things." Vivienne looked at Connor. "Boats, mostly," he said. "There's a marina, about a quarter-mile down. I do maintenance work." He said it without apology or elaboration, the way a person states a simple fact about their life. "Do you live nearby?" 30-minute drive. He nodded toward the car park. "She likes the drive. Calls it her adventure." Rosie had already sat down on the sand near Vivienne's feet and was beginning to arrange small stones into some private pattern only she understood. The wind moved her hair. Her small face was focused and serious. Vivienne felt something strange happen in her chest. Not the pressure from before, something quieter. Something that didn't quite have a name. She learned it in pieces, the way you learn anything true about a person not from what they tell you directly but from the accumulated texture of small things. Connor Marsh had grown up in Humboldt County, son of a commercial fisherman. He had worked boats since he was old enough to hold a line. He had, somewhere in his early 20s, spent 2 years studying mechanical engineering before running out of money and returning to what he knew. He did not seem to regret this. When she asked about it, later they had walked a little distance while Rosie ran ahead. He thought about it in a way that suggested he was actually thinking about it and not simply producing the reassuring answer. "I'd have been good at it," he said, "but I don't know that I'd have been happy at it. There's a difference." "There is," Vivienne agreed, and felt a small, private sting. He fixed marine engines. He did carpentry work in the off-season. He owned his small house outright, had bought it cheap at 28 from an estate sale when the housing market briefly cratered. His truck was old but ran well because he maintained it himself. His life had the quality of something he had built by hand, imperfect but solid. He was 34, 2 years younger than her. Rosie's mother had left when Rosie was 11 months old. Connor offered this information without drama. The way you disclose a fact that has long since finished being raw. She wasn't ready for the life, he said simply, or for the responsibility. I don't think she was ready for herself, honestly. He paused. Rosie has never met her. That's something we'll navigate when the time comes. Does she ask about her? Sometimes. He watched Rosie, who had found something interesting near the water's edge and was crouching over it. I don't lie to her. I just tell her the truth in pieces that fit her age. Vivienne said nothing for a moment. The surf came in, moved back. That's wise, she said finally. I don't know if it's wise. It's just what I have. She noticed, as they walked, that he was always tracking Rosie without seeming to watch her. A peripheral awareness. Steady and quiet. When Rosie ventured too close to a section of water where the incoming waves had more force, Connor angled their walk slightly without breaking his sentence, and they were suddenly closer to her. Rosie didn't notice. He hadn't made a production of it. It was simply what he did. Vivienne's father had not been that kind of man. Her ex-husband, before Marcus there, had been a brief, disastrous marriage in her late 20s, had not been that kind of man. She had surrounded herself with competent people, decisive people, ambitious people. She had very rarely been around someone who was simply present in the way Connor Marsh was present. It unsettled her in a way she couldn't immediately explain. Rosie ran back to them, slightly breathless, and thrust something at Vivienne, a piece of sea glass, worn smooth, the color of old ocean bottles. For you, she said. Rosie, you don't have to. It's for her, Dad. Vivienne took the glass. It was cold and smooth in her palm, and she closed her fingers around it. Thank you, she said. Rosie beamed and ran off again. Connor watched her go, and for a moment said nothing. Then, she does that with people she likes. Does she like people often? She likes most people, he said. But she gives the sea glass to the ones she really likes. She's selective about it. Vivienne looked at the pale green piece in her palm. She didn't know why it made her throat tighten, but it did. They had circled back toward the driftwood where Vivienne had been sitting, and Rosie had appointed herself the keeper of Vivienne's shoes, carrying them carefully by their straps. My shoes do that sometimes, Rosie said, examining the small leather bows with the concentrated attention of a child inspector. But not like this. These are fancy. I wear them for work, Vivienne said. What do you work? I run a company. Rosie considered this. What kind? We help other companies understand information. Data. Rosie nodded with the expression of someone who has heard adults say things that don't quite click, but has decided to file it away for later. Then, my friend Ellie has a mommy who runs something. She has a laptop in her car. Lots of people have laptops in their car these days. Do you? I do. Rosie seemed satisfied. She set the shoes down carefully next to Vivienne's feet and began digging in the pocket of her red jacket. The pocket appeared to contain a large number of things. Connor later described it as a traveling collection: stones, a small plastic horse with one missing leg, a folded piece of paper, a hair clip in the shape of a butterfly. She spread them out on the driftwood next to Vivienne with the deliberate care of an archivist. "This is Henry," she said, introducing the plastic horse. "He has 3 legs, but he can still run." "That's admirable," Vivienne said. "And this is from my book." The folded paper turned out to be a page torn carefully from a picture book, featuring a lighthouse in a storm. "I liked this picture, so I took it out. Dad said I shouldn't, but the book was already broken." Rosie Connor started. "It was," she said firmly. She refolded the lighthouse and put it away. Then she pulled the last item from the depths of the pocket: a chain. Very fine silver, with a small pendant on it, something delicate, shaped like a crescent moon. The silver had the particular dullness of a piece that had been handled very much, worn often. Vivienne's eyes went to it. Not because it was remarkable. It was a simple piece. The kind of thing a child might have been given, or found, or collected. But there was something about the shape of the pendant, the proportions of the arc, the slight asymmetry where the tip bent fractionally upward, that reached into Vivienne's chest and grabbed. Her breath changed. She didn't know yet why. She only knew it changed. "Pretty," she said, and her own voice sounded strange to her. "I found it," Rosie said. "Well, Dad found it. But he gave it to me, and now it's mine." Vivienne looked at Connor. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something careful in it, something paying attention. "Where did you find it?" Vivienne asked. Her voice was very even. She had spent years making her voice very even. "On the beach," Rosie said. "Not this beach. The other one. The one we used to go to before we moved. Bodega Bay," Connor said quietly. "About 5 years ago." 5 years ago. Vivienne looked at the necklace again. The pendant turned in the fading afternoon light. The asymmetry of the tip, the particular length of the chain, shorter than standard, made for a child, she had been told, when she had chosen it. Short enough that it won't catch on things. The jeweler on Grant Avenue in San Francisco, the one she no longer walked past, had said that, when she bought it, she had bought it 3 weeks before her daughter was born. Her daughter, whom she had named Clara. Clara, who had been 2 years old when she wandered away from a picnic at Bodega Bay on a September afternoon in 2019, and whom they never found. She did not scream. She did not grab the necklace. She sat very still. The way she had learned to sit still when the world was collapsing, a skill she had developed in a windowless room in a Sonoma County police station 7 years ago, during the longest night of her life. "Are you all right?" Connor asked. "Yes," she said. Rosie had moved on to showing Henry, the 3-legged horse, some features of the beach, and was some distance away. "You recognized it," Connor said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him. "What?" "The necklace." His voice was low, steady. "Something happened when you saw it." She could have denied it. She was very good at denying things. She had denied grief for 7 years, by converting it into motion, into work, into strategy. The denial was a skill she had perfected in the specific way you perfect anything that you practice every day without quite meaning to. But something about this man, the gray eyes, the economy of words, the way he simply looked at things and saw them, made the denial feel not possible. "My daughter had a necklace like that," she said carefully. "Exactly like that." Silence. The surf moved in and out. Rosie was showing Henry the horizon. "What happened to your daughter?" Connor asked. She had answered this question many times in the years immediately after. The police, the investigators, the grief counselor her company's HR department had quietly arranged. She had answered it until the question had become something she could respond to without feeling it fully. She felt it fully now. "She disappeared," Vivienne said. "Bodega Bay. September 2019. She was 2 years old." She paused. "She wasn't. They never found. There was no." She stopped, organized herself. "They found her jacket on the beach. Nothing else." She paused again. "The necklace was hers." Connor didn't speak immediately. She appreciated that. Most people rushed to fill the silence that followed that sentence. He let it exist. How old would she be now? He asked finally. 9, Vivienne said. She would have been 9 in March. Connor was very still. I found the necklace in September 2019, he said quietly. On the beach at Bodega Bay. Vivienne's heartbeat changed rhythm. A child's necklace, he continued. I thought it had been dropped. I kept it thinking I might find whoever lost it. But he stopped. I was there because I had a friend who lived in Jenner. I was there for a weekend. Rosie was with me. She was a baby, not even a year old. You were alone? Just you and Rosie? Yes. Vivienne said nothing. The cold was coming up now as the light began to fail. The sun had dropped behind the ridge, and the sky had gone from gray to a deeper, dimmer tone. There's something I need to ask you, she said. Her voice was not quite right. I know what you're going to ask, Connor said. He looked at Rosie. The little girl had turned and was coming back toward them now, Henry in one hand, sea glass in the other. We need to talk more. Not here, not like this. He looked back at Vivienne. But I need you to listen to everything before you decide anything. She studied his face. In her years of running a company, she had developed a reasonable ability to read people quickly. She read something in Connor Marsh that she had not encountered often. A person who did not want anything from her, and who was not, in this moment, afraid of the truth. All right, she said. Rosie arrived back between them and looked from face to face with the sharp antenna of a child who reads rooms accurately, if not precisely. Why do you look like that? She asked Vivienne. Like what? Like when something hurts, but you're trying not to show it. Vivienne looked at this child, her dark blonde hair, her cheeks reddened by wind, her gray eyes, and for the first time let herself look at her instead of looking away from what she feared to see. They went to the crab shack. It was a modest building at the marina's edge, weathered wood, 2 outdoor picnic tables, a chalkboard menu. The kind of place that existed by stubbornness and local loyalty. Connor ordered clam chowder in bread bowls and hot chocolate for Rosie, without looking at the menu. He had been here many times. Rosie sat across from Vivienne and arranged her pocket museum on the table, while they waited. Henry, the lighthouse page, the sea glass, the necklace. She always brings it when we come here, Connor said quietly, while Rosie was occupied. She's had it since she could hold things. It was always around. Does she know where it came from? I told her I found it on the beach and kept it for her. That's true. The food came. Rosie applied herself to the chowder with total dedication. Vivienne held her cup of coffee and watched Connor watch his daughter eat. And she tried to hold steady the thing that was happening inside her, which felt enormous and fragile simultaneously, like something she was carrying in both hands that she could not afford to drop. Tell me, she said. Everything. Connor was quiet for a moment. He broke a piece of bread from the edge of his bowl and didn't eat it. I was at Bodega Bay that weekend. It was a Saturday. Early September. Rosie and I had walked down to the south end of the beach, away from the families. He paused. I found the necklace in the wet sand, near the rocks. It had been in the water. I think the chain was tangled around a piece of kelp. Vivienne was very still. I looked around. Didn't see anyone who might have dropped it. I asked at the ranger station when I packed up to leave. They said nothing had been reported. He paused again. This was before the news reached me. I don't watch local news often. I was living up in Mendocino County at the time. I didn't read about the search until 2 weeks later. I saw something on a flyer in a grocery store in Fort Bragg. A flyer with a photo of the search. By the time I saw it, he exhaled slowly. By the time I saw it, the main search had been stood down. I called the number on the flyer. A Sonoma County Sheriff's deputy took my information. I told them about the necklace and when and where I found it. They sent someone to look at it. I drove down to Petaluma with Rosie in her car seat and sat in a sheriff's office and let them photograph it. Vivienne's hands were very tight around her cup. They kept the information and said they'd follow up, Connor said. And then he spread his hands. Nothing. I called again 3 months later. The case was technically still open, but they said the investigation had moved to a different phase. They didn't ask me to return the necklace. I kept calling. Last contact I had was early 2020, and the deputy I'd been speaking with had transferred. He looked at her directly. I never knew the name of the child, he said. I never knew who to connect it to. The flyer had a photo of the beach, and the search area, and a general description of the circumstances. It didn't name the child. I had no. He stopped. I want you to understand that I had no way to find you. Vivienne believed him. She had been a skeptic for a long time. Life had made her one, but she believed him. There was no architecture of manipulation in what he was saying. There was just a man describing what had happened. I know, she said. Rosie looked up from her bread bowl. Dad always keeps things safe, she said, with the authority of someone who has never doubted this. Vivienne looked at her. The necklace was in Rosie's hand again, the pendant turning. Rosie, Vivienne said carefully, can I look at that? Rosie handed it over without hesitation, the trusting way children hand things to people they have decided to trust. Vivienne held it up to the light. The crescent moon pendant. The slight upward bend at the tip. The chain that had been made shorter than standard, because short enough that it won't catch on things. On the back of the pendant, almost invisible in the shallow engraving, the initial C, she had put that there. She had paid extra for it. She had thought, she'll keep it forever, and when she's grown, she'll know it was hers. Vivienne set the necklace carefully on the table between them and put her hands flat on the wood surface, fingers spread, the way she sometimes pressed her palms to her desk when she needed to feel something solid. She did not cry. But it was the nearest she had come to it in years. That night, Vivienne drove to the small motel she'd booked on impulse near the coastal highway, a place called the Tidewater Inn. 12 units in a horseshoe around a parking lot, a vending machine by the office, a view of the highway that became a view of dark water if you craned. She had not planned to stay more than one night. She sat on the edge of the bed in her blazer and called Priya. Cancel everything through next week, she said. Vivienne. Please, Priya. A pause. The sound of Priya recalibrating. Are you okay? I'll explain later. Please. She set the phone face down on the bedspread and sat in the quiet for a long time. The heater in the room ticked. The highway made a low, continuous sound. She pulled her knees up and sat in the way. She never sat in her office or her apartment, or anywhere she might be observed folded in on herself, small. The sheriff's department had classified Clara's disappearance as an accidental drowning in the absence of any evidence to the contrary. The undertow at Bodega Bay in September could be severe, she had been told this many times, by many people who meant to comfort her and did not. A 2-year-old who wandered to the waterline. There had been a moment of inattention, a phone call her assistant, regarding a contract renewal that felt, in retrospect, so cosmically insignificant that she could not summon its specifics. 2 minutes, maybe 3. She had looked up and Clara was not where she had been. And then she had walked toward the water, and then she had run, and after that, the sequence of events became less like memory and more like a series of frames from a film she had not agreed to be in. They had searched for 11 days with air support and dive teams and 200 volunteers in an organized pattern that Vivienne had watched from the command post, very still, making herself useful, by organizing the volunteer sign-in sheets, because it was something to do with her hands. They had never found a body. The absence of a body was the thing that had never allowed the loss to completely calcify. Grief needs a fixed point, a place to lay its full weight. Without one, it circulates not constantly, but unpredictably. Rising when you are unprepared. Carrying you sideways when you believed you had it contained. Circulating grief was the most exhausting kind, because it had no season, no perimeter. You could not schedule it into a calendar slot and then close the slot. It simply arrived. Vivienne thought about Rosie's gray eyes. The very specific gray of them, and the dark blonde hair, which she told herself proved nothing dark blonde was common. Gray was a common enough eye color. Children on every stretch of California coastline had dark blonde hair. Clara's eyes had been gray-green, a color that had come from Vivienne's own mother. A specific, distinctive color, not common gray. She thought, children's eyes change in the first 2 years. She thought, Rosie is 5. Her eyes wouldn't still be changing. She thought, stop inventing reasons. She thought, you need to be rational. Vivienne Hartwell had been rational for 7 years. She had applied rationality to grief the way she applied it to everything, rigorously, systematically, with a framework and a plan. It had kept her functional. It had kept her company running. It had kept her dressed and upright and employed and capable of human conversation. It had also, she now understood, kept her about 4 inches to the left of her own life, close enough to look inhabited but never quite stepping all the way in. She called an old colleague, a private investigator named Dan Schuster, whom she'd used twice for corporate due diligence work, and left him a detailed message. She told him about the necklace, the engraving, the dates, and the location. She asked him to pull whatever records he could from the Sonoma County case files. She asked him to find out whether a Connor Marsh of Mendocino County had indeed contacted the sheriff's office in late 2019. She asked him to look into the specifics of Rosie's birth registration. Then she added, I also need to know how to arrange a voluntary DNA comparison. Quietly, I'll pay for expedited. She lay down on top of the bedspread with her shoes still on. She stared at the water stain on the ceiling, which was shaped, very approximately, like the coast of a country she did not recognize. The exhaustion of the day was enormous and complicated, and she fell into it the way you fall into something you've been fighting too long to keep fighting. In the morning, she had a text from Connor. Rosie wants to know if you'd like to come for pancakes. No obligation, but she'd like to show you something. She drove to his address, a small house set back from a gravel road, backed by Douglas firs, the kind of place that was invisible until you knew exactly where to look. A raised porch with mismatched chairs, a child's bicycle with training wheels propped against the railing. Smoke coming from a stone chimney. Rosie opened the door before Vivienne had finished parking. I knew you'd come, she said, in the tone of someone confirming a hypothesis. The inside of the house was simple and clean in the way of a space that a person has made careful choices about over a long time. Books on low shelves. A child's artwork tacked neatly to a board near the kitchen. Rosie's drawings had a lively, ambitious quality people, with enormous arms doing things, climbing, swimming, carrying objects that appeared to be larger than the people themselves. Connor was at the stove. He nodded when she came in and handed her a coffee mug without asking how she took it. She noted that he'd added a small amount of cream, which was exactly how she took it. She didn't ask how he'd known. They ate pancakes. Rosie ate 4 and talked continuously about Henry, about a girl at her school named Becca who had a hamster that had escaped 3 times, about a book she was reading in which a girl found a door in a cliff that opened onto the sea. Then she went and got something from her room. It was a shoebox, covered in stickers and secured with a rubber band. She set it on the table between the plates, with the gravity of someone presenting evidence. Dad says I can show you, she said. Vivienne looked at Connor. Open it, he said, inside the box. A collection of paper, photographs, small objects. A child's life in pieces. Birth certificates. A pediatric growth chart with a name at the top, Rose Eleanor Marsh, and a date of birth in August 2018. A hospital photo of an infant. A small plastic bracelet from a hospital nursery. And, at the bottom of the box, something that did not belong with the rest. A photograph. Small, the size of a print someone would carry in a wallet. 2 adults, a woman and a man not Connor, sitting at an outdoor table. Between them, in a high chair, a baby, perhaps a year old, round-cheeked, bright-eyed, a baby who could have been any baby. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting Vivienne did not recognize, Bodega, June 2019. Where did you get this? Vivienne asked. Connor sat down. He folded his hands on the table. I found it in Rosie's jacket pocket, he said. About a month after Bodega Bay. The jacket she'd been wearing that day. He paused. I put it in the box because I didn't know what else to do with it. I didn't know who those people were. Vivienne looked at the photograph for a long time. That's not Clara, she said finally. Her voice was even. The eyes are different. The ears. She set it down. I know my daughter's face. I know, Connor said quietly. I didn't think it was connected. I just kept everything. Vivienne looked up. Why are you showing me this? Because you deserve to see everything, he said. Every piece I have. Not just the ones that fit a narrative. All of it. In full. So you can make up your own mind. She looked at him across the table. Rosie had climbed down from her chair and was rearranging her sticker collection in the living room, not listening, or appearing not to listen. There's no way to know, Vivienne said. Without a DNA test, Connor said. Yes. Would you? Yes, he said. Whenever you're ready. Wherever you want. No conditions. She had been prepared, she realized, for him to hesitate, for there to be a negotiation, for him to protect what he had, and he wasn't doing that. He was sitting here in his kitchen at 8:30 in the morning, hands flat on the table, offering her the truth without reservation. You know what it might mean, she said. I know what it might mean. They looked at each other. Are you afraid? She asked. He took a moment. Yes, he said. But that's mine to carry. It's not a reason to keep anything from you. The results came back in 14 days. Vivienne received the email at her office in San Francisco, in a building she had returned to with the mechanical efficiency of someone performing a function they no longer quite believe in. She had come back to the city after the third morning at Connor's house, driven the 4 hours south on Highway 1-inch, the kind of focused, empty silence that follows something enormous. She had not known what to do with herself at the office. She had attended 2 meetings. She had signed things. She had been, by all observable criteria, functional. Priya had noticed. Priya always noticed. You're different, she'd said carefully, one afternoon, setting a coffee on Vivienne's desk with the particular delicacy of someone navigating an uncertain surface. Good different or bad different? Vivienne had asked. Priya had considered it. Present different. She opened the email at her desk, still wearing her coat. The desk lamp on because the November sky outside was the same gray as the coat. She read it 3 times. Then she sat down. Then she called Connor. He answered on the second ring. She could hear the sound of a table saw in the background. The particular rhythm of a workshop. It stopped when he picked up. I got the results, she said. A pause. Vivienne. His voice was careful. Tell me. Inconclusive, she said. There's no match to either of us. A longer pause. She's not, he started. She's not Clara, Vivienne said. The markers are clear. She's not related to me. She stopped. And the paternity markers also came back. She is yours, biologically. Silence. I don't understand, he said. Rosie was born in August 2018, Vivienne said. Clara disappeared in September 2019. She paused. I think I wanted it to be true. I think I needed it to be true. And I convinced myself that enough coincidences could make it so. She closed her eyes briefly. The necklace was Clara's. The DNA is not. They're 2 separate things. She heard him exhale. It was a long breath, the kind that moves through a whole body. She's yours, Vivienne said again. She's fully and entirely yours. I never doubted that, he said. I doubted. He stopped. I doubted whether I had the right to prevent you from finding out. You didn't prevent anything, she said. You gave me everything you had. That was the right thing. The line was quiet. How are you? He asked. She thought about it honestly. I don't know yet, she said. I think there's grief to do. Specific grief, the kind that comes with the end of a specific hope. She looked at the window. San Francisco in gray November. The bay just visible between buildings. But I also think. She paused. I think finding the necklace meant something. Even if it didn't mean what I thought. What did it mean? She thought about it. It meant she was at Bodega Bay, she said quietly. It means we know. That's more than we had. She heard him breathing. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry it wasn't what you hoped. Don't be sorry, she said. You gave me more truth than I've had in 7 years. That's not nothing. December came. The coast turned its particular winter shade greener than autumn, darker at the water, the hills behind the highway brown and gold and ready to go to sleep. Vivienne had given herself the permission, finally, to grieve. This had required actual effort, not the effort of doing, which she was skilled at, but the effort of not doing, of sitting in the specific shape of the loss without immediately converting it into action. She had found a therapist she actually liked, a woman with an office near the water in the outer sunset, who did not ask Vivienne to feel things on a schedule, and who had a quality that Vivienne had not expected to value in a therapist. She was not impressed by Vivienne's competence. She received it neutrally, noted it, and then continued asking the questions that got underneath it. They were working through the specific layers of the loss, the original loss, the 7 years of avoidance, the grief that had been reactivated and then, in a different way, resolved by the experience at Crescent Cove. The DNA test had not given her Clara back, but it had, in a strange and indirect way, given her something she needed just as much. Confirmation. The necklace had been at Bodega Bay. It had been in the water, near the rocks at the south end of the beach. It had been found by a man who had reported it promptly, done the right thing in every way available to him, and kept it safe. She was there, her therapist had said, when Vivienne described this. You know she was there. That's not nothing. It was not nothing. It was, in fact, a great deal. It was the difference between a disappearance that had no geography and one that had a last known location, a final coordinate. It did not bring Clara back, but it gave the grief somewhere to stand. She drove up to Crescent Cove on a Saturday in early December, and she didn't second-guess it. Connor had texted the week before. Rosie has been asking about you. You don't have to come, but if you wanted to. She had waited 2 days before texting back. Saturday morning, his response had come in about 40 seconds. We'll be at the beach by 9. She pulled into the gravel lot, and Connor's truck was already there, which she had expected. She could see them on the beach, Rosie in the red jacket, Connor a few paces back, the familiar geometry of them that she had replayed from memory several times in the past 2 weeks, in the way you replay things that have marked you. Rosie saw her first, and came running with the same full-bodied commitment. She ran toward everything, arms slightly out for balance, boots thudding on the packed sand. She arrived breathless. She was carrying the necklace. I've been keeping it for you, she said, and held it out. Vivienne crouched down so that she was at eye level with rosy gray eyes, clear and direct, looking at her without complication. She looked at the small hand, at the crescent moon pendant in the winter morning light. Rosie, she said carefully. I'd like you to keep it. Rosie looked at the necklace, then at Vivienne. But it was your daughter's. Yes. Does that make you sad? Vivienne thought about it honestly. The way she was learning to do, not reaching for the answer that was least complicated, but for the one that was true. It does, she said. And it also makes me happy. Both at the same time. She looked at the pendant. I'm glad it's been somewhere safe. Somewhere warm. She paused. Someone looked after it well. Rosie considered this with the full, serious weight of her attention. Then she put the necklace back in her pocket with the careful respect she gave her important things, and reached out and took Vivienne's hand. Come on then, she said, in the tone of someone managing a project. They walked back toward Connor together. He watched them come across the sand, and said nothing when they arrived, only made room, the way he made room for things, without making a performance of it. The three of them stood for a moment at the water's edge, the surf running up close to their feet and pulling back. Coffee, Connor said. It was somewhere between an offer and a certainty. Obviously, Vivienne said. They walked up to the parking lot together, and Rosie climbed into the truck cab and began arranging herself among her objects with the focused efficiency of a person who has a system. Connor opened the thermos and poured into the battered travel cups he kept behind the seat. He handed Vivienne hers. She noted, again, the small amount of cream. The right amount. You remembered, she said. I noticed the first time. She leaned against the truck and held her coffee and looked at the gray water. The gulls were very busy over something they'd found at the tide line. The wind came steadily from the northwest, the way wind came on this coast in December, reliable and unhurried. In the cab, Rosie was briefing Henry on the morning's events with great seriousness, holding the plastic horse up to the windshield so he could see the beach. Vivienne thought about the necklace in the red pocket. She thought about the jeweler on Grant Avenue, the short chain, the engraved initial. She thought about a beach in September 2019, and the specific 2-minute phone call that she had been measuring herself against for 7 years, and which she was not done measuring, not yet but beginning, at last, to set down in between. Her therapist had used the word integrate, which had sounded clinical until she'd begun to understand what it meant. Not to stop feeling it, but to stop having it be the thing her entire architecture was built around avoiding. She was letting it be part of her now. One part. Not all of her, not the central pillar. One part. She thought about Clara, who would have been 9 in March. She let herself imagine her for a moment, the 7-year-old she hadn't allowed herself, and the 9-year-old she had not yet tried. It hurt in the specific way that love hurt, when it had nowhere to go. She sat with it. She had been learning to sit with it. She's a remarkable kid, Vivienne said. I know, Connor said. You made her remarkable. She did most of it herself. Vivienne smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that started at the corners and didn't announce itself. She had been smiling like that more often in the past 2 weeks. Not the deployed, executive smile, the other kind. Rosie climbed down from the cab and appeared between them, then grabbed one hand, each Vivienne's right, Connor's left, and began walking them back toward the beach with the authority of someone who has made a decision on behalf of the group. Again, she announced. They went. The sea was still cold. The wind was still steady. Rosie ran ahead when something caught her attention and came back when she wanted to share it. Connor walked at a pace that was calibrated, always, to whoever was beside him, something she had noticed on the first day and had noticed every time since. Vivienne let herself simply walk, not producing a plan, not managing an outcome, not running anything, just here, just this. The necklace was in a red pocket, safe. The sea moved in its ancient, unhurried way. The cold was in her feet and her hands, and she didn't mind it, because some things were not meant to be comfortable, and some things that were not comfortable were also, in their way, deeply fine cold that reminded you were present, cold that said, this is real, this is now, this is the actual world. Rosie called back over her shoulder. Come on. They came on. The light was already turning, the short December afternoon beginning its early tilt toward dusk, the sky behind the ridge going the color of old pewter. In half an hour, it would be too dark, and they would go back to the truck and drive wherever they were going. They hadn't decided. And that was all right. She was learning that some things didn't need to be decided in advance. But not yet. For now there was only the shore, and the cold, and the small figure running ahead in the red jacket, and the man walking beside her with the quiet certainty of someone who had built a life by hand and stood in it squarely. And Vivienne herself present, at last, in a way she had not been present for 7 years. She breathed in. She breathed out. The sea went on doing what it does,